My name is Sara Carter, and my inheritance was a joke without a punchline. My brother got the estate, manicured, modern, packed with assets. I got a crumbling farmhouse in Montana I hadn't seen since I was 7. That was how they said goodbye. Not with a hug, not with a memory, but with coordinates and silence. I arrived late to the reading. The lawyer's office was beige and bloodless, like grief had been sanitized for efficiency. My mother didn't even glance at me. Jake buried his gaze in his phone. And Ryan, my golden boy brother, sat smug, like he already knew how the story would end. They weren't wrong. I wasn't written out. Just written aside. Cascade County, the lawyer said. The words fell like ash. And just like that, I was dismissed with a whisper, and a property no one had visited in decades. But grief has a strange way of pulling threads you didn't know were still knotted. And that old cabin in Montana, the one they thought would be forgotten, held more than dust and broken wood. It held a history they tried to erase, and a name I was never supposed to find. Before I take you through what I uncovered behind that sealed basement door, before the courtroom, before the photo, before the letter that changed everything, tell me in the comments, have you ever received something that looked like a burden, but became the map back to who you really are? Don't forget to subscribe. Because this story isn't just about inheritance, it's about legacy, about the cost of silence, and the power of a name that refuses to stay buried. I had shown up late. The meeting was already in progress when I stepped into the lawyer's office, a space that felt more like a morgue than a place where last wishes were honored. The air smelled like dust and stale coffee, and no one looked up when I entered, except the receptionist, who blinked twice as if not expecting me to actually come. The walls were blank, off-white. No family photos, no warmth. Just thick files on a glossy oak desk and silence that hummed like static. My mother didn't even glance my way. She sat beside Ryan, composed, spine straight, her manicured fingers laced across her lap. Jake was there too. He caught my eye for a second before glancing down at his phone, pretending not to notice. I wasn't surprised. We hadn't spoken since the engagement imploded. Or rather, since he imploded it. The lawyer cleared his throat and resumed reading, monotone and efficient, like he was ordering from a diner menu. And to my son, Ryan Carter, I bequeath full ownership of the Carter family estate, including all assets and liquid holdings tied to the Lincoln property. I felt nothing for a moment. Not shock, not anger, just numbness. That house was never going to be mine. It never felt like home. It belonged to Ryan before he ever held the deed. The lawyer flipped the page. To my daughter, Sara Carter, I leave the property formerly owned by Walter Carter, located in Cascade County, Montana. The deed and all associated records will be transferred immediately. There are no contingencies. No one said anything. I waited for a laugh, some kind of punchline. Montana? Walter's off-grid shack in the middle of nowhere? I barely remembered it except for vague images. Dust, trees, and the bitter smell of pine. We stopped going after I turned 7, after my father called it a waste of legacy. I looked around the room. Jake was leaning forward now, elbows on his knees, but he didn't meet my eyes. My mother shifted slightly, her lips thinning. Ryan looked smug. He didn't even pretend to hide it. After the reading, people stood in small clusters. No one spoke to me. I made my way to the hallway, brushing past Jake when he tried to say something. Sara, wait, But I didn't stop. I walked past him, down the stairs and into the parking lot. The sun too bright for how cold it felt inside my chest. I kept walking until I hit my car, yanked the door open and slammed it shut behind me. Only then did I let myself breathe. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and closed my eyes. It's for the best, Sara. That's what my mother whispered at the funeral just before she hugged Ryan a little too tightly. I had brushed it off at the time. Grief made people strange. But now, it felt like a warning wrapped in farewell. I didn't cry. I stared at the dashboard for what could have been minutes or hours, then reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and typed, Carter Cabin, Cascade County, Montana. It was still listed in some public registry. Barely. No photos, just a plat map and a scrawled digital scan of a deed with my name on it. No one had touched it in decades. I zoomed into the satellite view. Trees like dark veins, a rough dirt road, and a roof that looked half-caved. Still, something caught in my throat. Not dread, not excitement. A pull. Walter had lived there after divorcing my grandfather. Cut ties with the rest of the Carters. They called him a disgrace. Said he was unstable. But I remembered him differently. I remembered pine needles in my socks and stories around a smoky fire. I remembered quiet mornings, him teaching me how to whittle a stick while the grown-ups drank coffee and argued inside. A farmhouse that time forgot. And now, it was mine. I leaned back in my seat, my fingers hovering over Jake's name on my phone. His contact photo, an old one, still showed him grinning with a toothpick in his mouth. I stared at it for a long time, then pressed delete. She books a one-way flight to Montana, deleting Jake's number before boarding. The farmhouse smelled like ash and thyme, but I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to understand why. The wind howled through the broken window panes as I stepped inside, my boots crunching against a layer of brittle leaves and ancient dust. The screen door had nearly come off its hinges, groaning every time it moved, like the house itself was trying to speak after years of silence. I hadn't seen this place in 24 years, not since my 7th birthday, when we left in a flurry of harsh words and slammed car doors. My memories were faded, blunted by time, but the smell, the mingling of old wood, faint smoke, and earth, tugged at something deeper. I moved carefully, ducking beneath a drooping beam as I stepped into what used to be the living room. A tattered armchair sagged in the corner, facing a fireplace filled with charred remains. There was no heat, but I didn't shiver. My skin prickled for another reason. An electric unease, like I was being watched. I found the kitchen next. Rusted fixtures, peeling linoleum. A single cracked mug still sat on the counter, untouched, as if waiting. I ran my fingers over it, then opened a few cabinets. Empty. Just cobwebs, a rusted spoon, and the hollow weight of abandonment. Then something thudded outside. I froze. A shadow moved past the window, a figure approaching slowly. I grabbed the first thing I could, a curtain rod, and waited by the door. 3 soft knocks. I opened the door an inch. An older woman stood on the porch, bundled in a tan coat and knit scarf. She looked up at me with pale eyes and a mouth that didn't quite smile. You must be Walter's granddaughter. I didn't answer. She held up a thermos and a paper bag. Soup. And cornbread. Still guarded, I stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. She didn't. I'm not one for old ghosts, she said, placing the food gently on the porch bench. But you should eat. You look cold. Thanks, I said. You're Mabel. I live just over the ridge. Her gaze drifted past me, into the darkened hallway behind. You came alone? I nodded. She hesitated. They were never meant for you to come back? Before I could ask what that meant, she turned and walked back into the wind. No goodbye. Just the sound of her boots crunching snow and the wind pulling at her coat like fingers. I brought the food inside and closed the door. Still warm. Still unsettling. Later, as dusk melted into night, I wandered deeper into the house. The floors creaked, moaned. I passed the old bedroom. Mine? I couldn't be sure. The walls were bare, but I found a photo on a shelf, half covered in soot. Me. Maybe 5 years old. Smiling, squinting into the sun. Walter stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. Next to him, a man in full Lakota dress. Long braids, a patterned shirt, and eyes that seemed to see beyond the lens. I didn't recognize him. I carried the photo into the hallway and sat on the steps, staring until my vision blurred. Why had this been hidden? And why did the name Wikasa Win float to the front of my mind? Unfamiliar and yet haunting. I decided to sleep in the front room by the fireless hearth. I wrapped myself in 2 coats and curled on the floor, the photo tucked beneath my pillow. That night, I dreamed. There was fire, smoke, the sound of drums not pounding but pulsing, slow and ancient. A man stood on the edge of a cliff, backlit by stars, whispering my name. Not Sara. Sara Wikasa. When I sat up with a gasp, morning light had begun to bleed through the cracks in the boards. I rubbed my face and tried to dismiss the dream, but the whisper still echoed. I forced myself to move, needing something real to ground me. I stepped into what used to be Walter's study. The floor creaked beneath my feet. Then one particular board gave a soft, hollow thump. I knelt, fingers prying at the edges. It took effort, but finally the board gave way, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside, a bundle of papers, water-stained but intact. Property records, old letters, receipts. And one photo of Walter standing with the same Lakota man, this time shaking hands beneath a wooden arch marked with tribal symbols. But that wasn't all. In the basement, I found the sealed door. It looked out of place, reinforced, deliberately hidden behind a shelf. The air around it felt heavier, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. I hesitated for only a moment before searching the house for something to pry it open. 10 minutes later, I returned with a rusted crowbar. The door groaned and fought me, but eventually it surrendered. The hinges screamed as it swung inward, revealing a small room that smelled of cedar and something older. Inside were shelves of carefully preserved artifacts. Feathers, beadwork, woven blankets, a few framed certificates. A large drum leaned against the wall, its surface painted with what looked like a family tree and symbols I didn't understand. And on a small wooden pedestal, protected under glass, sat a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front, but not as I knew it. To Sara Wikasa Win. "You're not just Walter Carter's granddaughter," Samuel said. "You're his Lakota heir." The words hit me harder than I expected. I sat across from him in a small office inside the Lakota Cultural Center just outside Billings, the envelope clutched in my lap. The air was thick with sage and old paper, and sunlight poured through the narrow window, casting a warm glow across the shelves of books and artifacts. I'd driven 4 hours through pale golden plains and lonely highways to get here, with the sealed envelope, the photo, and a bundle of Walter's documents packed tightly in my bag. Something inside me refused to wait another day. I needed answers. And the moment I saw Samuel Red Elk, with his calm eyes and weathered hands, I knew I'd come to the right place. He motioned for the letter, and I handed it to him, watching as he peeled the seal gently, like it was something sacred. The silence stretched as he read. When he finally looked up, he didn't speak right away. Then, "Sara Wikasa Win. Do you know what that means?" I shook my head. "It means woman of the lineage, not just a name, a role." I stared at the old paper, my name written in a script I didn't recognize. "Walter, he was Lakota." "Half," Samuel confirmed. "His mother was Oglala. He didn't advertise it, but those who mattered knew, including your grandfather on your mother's side, who hated that part of him." That part of him. The phrase echoed like a slur. Samuel glanced at the table where I'd laid out the bundle of artifacts. He reached for a small beaded medallion, flipping it over. "This was made by Anna Red Hawk, only given to direct descendants." My head spun. I don't understand. Why didn't anyone tell me? My dad, he mocked reservations, called it land that breeds losers. I thought... I trailed off. "He knew," Samuel said gently. "And I suspect that's why Walter tried to hide this part of himself from you. To protect you." The office door creaked open, and a younger woman stepped in. Slim build, sharp eyes, a laptop tucked under one arm. "Maggie," Samuel introduced. "She's a law student helping us digitize tribal records." I gave her a nod, but she didn't smile. Maggie stepped forward, eyeing the documents on the table. Some of this could be significant. Cultural artifacts, land rights, even burial claims. But if you make a claim publicly, it could be challenged. Hard. Challenged how? Family, media, opportunists. You're not enrolled, are you? I shook my head. I didn't even know I was eligible. Maggie crossed her arms. Then they'll say you're not legitimate. She is, Samuel said quietly. Maggie gave a short shrug, as if to say maybe so, but the courts won't care. I looked back at the letter. It was written in Walter's hand, his voice clearer in ink than it had ever been in person. He'd written about land, about legacy, about the shame others tried to force on him, and his choice to preserve what he could in silence. He'd left the farmhouse to me because it sat on sacred ground, used for rituals, healing, stories. They'd bulldoze it if they could, he'd written. But you, Sara, you remember? Except I didn't. Not clearly. I remembered flashes, drums, a circle of people, a man with long hair lifting me onto his shoulders. But my father had erased the rest. Through sarcasm, through silence. Samuel stood, motioning me to follow. Come, there's something else. We moved down the hall to a locked archival room. Samuel entered a code and led me inside, the air cooling instantly. He gestured to a cabinet. 2 months ago, we received this from a tribal liaison in South Dakota. It's a record of private declarations filed by tribal members not registered through the BIA. Walter Carter's name is here. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, notarized papers dated 2020. A private will, filed separately from the one read in Lincoln. Walter had transferred the farmhouse and surrounding acres to me, not as inheritance, but as stewardship. For preservation, ceremony, and community, it said. To be held by Sara Win, rightful custodian of the land's story. I touched the paper, not breathing. They won't like this, Maggie said softly. Who? Anyone who thought you'd stay quiet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I fished it out. Unknown number, I answered. Sis. Ryan's voice slithered through the line. Funny, I heard you've been digging around, finding secret wills, talking to old tribesmen. I have lawyers too, you know. He paused. Oh, and Jake says hi. Jake stood on my porch like we hadn't broken each other just weeks ago. Let's talk, he said. I have a buyer. The screen door creaked open as I stepped out, arms crossed over a sweatshirt I hadn't meant for anyone to see. Behind me, the farmhouse crackled in its usual hush. Wood groaning, the wind pushing against windows that no longer sealed. The dusk bled into the sky with slow, bruised indifference. Jake, I said flatly, what are you doing here? He gestured toward the house like he still had the right. Heard you were up here all alone. Figured I'd check in. You weren't answering your phone? I stared at him. Because you gave my brother intel behind my back. He raised both hands. Okay, look, that's fair. But this is different. I'm here on my own. I wanted to offer something. You shouldn't be here. He hesitated. There's a buyer, legitimate, from a museum acquisition department. They're offering good money for the land and whatever's inside. And you just decided to come tell me this out of charity? He looked down, then back at me, that practiced vulnerability returning. Sara, I get it. You're angry. But this place? It's a weight. And I think it's going to get heavier before it lets you breathe. I'm just trying to help you. Move on. By selling off what my grandfather protected? I asked. He tilted his head. He's gone. And that land could be put to better use by people who know what they're doing. I didn't answer. I watched the man who once stood beside me in hospital rooms and courtrooms, now pitching me an exit like it was some favor. I set up a meeting, he added. Just to talk. Tomorrow, noon, diner off 4th. You don't have to agree to anything, just hear them out. And before I could refuse, he walked back to his car. leaving the sour scent of aftershave and bad faith lingering in the air. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Mabel's voice in my head. "They'll come for what they buried you with." At the time, I thought it was a metaphor, or just one of her poetic warnings. Now it felt like prophecy. The diner off 4th Street was one of those places stuck in time. Torn leather booths, waitresses with names like Bev or Cheryl, and coffee that tasted like it had been percolating since the Clinton administration. Jake was already there when I arrived, seated in a corner booth with 2 mugs in front of him and a thick folder by his elbow. He slid one mug toward me. "I didn't ask for that," I said. He just smiled. "It's how I remember you liked it." I didn't drink it. A man joined us 10 minutes later. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, well-tailored but not flashy. He introduced himself simply as Mark. He didn't give a last name, and his card said nothing more than Acquisitions Advisor. "We're very interested in your property," he began, voice calm and professional. "Our institution believes in preserving cultural artifacts, especially those with tribal significance. If they're kept by individuals, they often deteriorate or get lost. We offer resources to make sure they're protected and respected." It almost sounded noble. Almost. "And what happens if I say no?" I asked. Mark gave a thin smile. "Nothing. But it would be a missed opportunity." When he stepped away to take a call, Jake leaned closer. "Just think about it," he said. "You could use the money to start fresh. Open your own firm. Get out of the mess your family dumped on you." I didn't answer. Instead, I nodded, reached into my bag as if for lip balm, and tapped the voice recorder on my phone, letting it run. Jake's phone rang next, and he excused himself to answer it near the bathrooms. I sat in silence, pretending to sip coffee while the recorder captured everything. "Yeah, she came. No, she's listening, but I don't think she'll fight. Yes, Ryan, I'll get her to sign. Relax." My stomach flipped. He wasn't even hiding it. When he returned, his grin was back. "Well?" he asked. I reached into my pocket, touched the warm screen of my phone. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, sliding out of the booth. "And for the proof?" Jake blinked. "What?" I turned, walking toward the door, heart pounding in rhythm with every step. Outside, I stared at the screen. The red light was still blinking. Recording still running. "Now I know who you still work for," I whispered. The courtroom was small, but my brother's ego filled every corner. "She's delusional," Ryan told the judge. "This land was never hers." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with a carved face and eyes that didn't blink much, didn't flinch. She just tapped her pen once on the desk and said, "We'll let the evidence speak for itself." Ryan leaned back with a smirk, his lawyer smoothing out a set of exhibits on the polished oak table in front of them. He wore a gray suit tailored too tight, and his voice, full of inherited confidence, bounced off the wood-paneled walls like it belonged there. Mine felt quieter, but not weaker. Across the aisle, I sat between Maggie and Samuel. The courthouse air smelled like old varnish and bureaucracy, the kind of place that had swallowed stories like mine for generations. But not today. The bailiff called us to order, and the hearing began. Ryan's lawyer started by painting me as unstable. "Ms. Carter," he said, drawing out the syllables as if I were some charity case, "has no tribal enrollment, no formal recognition, and until recently, no presence in Cascade County. The claim that she has rights over the Carter property, now under dispute due to discovered cultural artifacts, is, frankly, without legal merit." He pointed to me. "She's an interior architect, not a historian, not an anthropologist, and certainly not an heir to anything sacred." I didn't look at him. I looked straight at the judge. My fingers curled tightly around the edges of the folder in my lap. I took a breath and stood. "May I speak?" I asked. The judge gave a single nod. I stepped forward and placed the folder on the bench, opening it to reveal photographs of the artifacts, each one carefully labeled. The medallion, the ceremonial feathers, the documents found in the sealed basement, and finally, Walter's letter. I slid the envelope forward. This is in my grandfather's handwriting. It names me by a Lakota name, Wakasa Win, woman of the lineage. He left these items to me not as keepsakes, but as stewardship, as continuation. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have corroborating testimony? Samuel stood. His presence shifted the air. Your Honor, I am Samuel Red Elk, curator and historical advisor to the Lakota Cultural Center in Billings. I reviewed these artifacts personally. Several are traceable to Anna Red Hawk's lineage, which Walter Carter was part of through his mother. That lineage passes to Ms. Carter through blood. He placed a document on the desk. This is a record of Walter's private will, notarized in 2020, which names Sara as legal custodian of the land for purposes of cultural preservation. Under Montana Code, annotated Section 76-2-901, properties tied to tribal heritage and meeting historical interest standards qualify for such designation. Maggie rose beside him. Further, she added, my research confirms that Sara has legal standing to maintain the land under this clause, especially with independent tribal endorsement. Her lack of enrollment does not negate bloodline when confirmed by family records and community acknowledgement. Ryan shifted in his chair, jaw tightening. The judge reviewed the documents, lips moving silently as she scanned Walter's handwriting, the notarized seal, the photographs. 10 minutes passed in a silence so sharp I could hear the breath catch in my throat. Then the judge looked up. In light of the private will, the direct bloodline acknowledgement, and the cultural significance confirmed by the Lakota Cultural Center, she said slowly, the court finds for Sara Carter. The land is to be preserved as designated. The opposing claim is denied. I felt the room release a breath it had been holding since I walked in. Ryan stood abruptly, whispering something to his lawyer, who tried to hush him. The judge nodded to me once. Ms. Carter, you are advised to work with the historical registry within 90 days. Court is adjourned. As the gavel fell, the sounds outside began to bleed in, voices chanting softly. When we stepped outside, the courthouse steps were lined with Lakota youth holding hand-painted signs. Preserve our past. Our stories matter. A drumbeat echoed from someone's phone speaker, faint but steady. Ryan brushed past me, his eyes dark. This isn't over, Sara, he muttered. Not by a long shot. I didn't answer. He wasn't worth one. From the side, I saw Jake. He approached slowly, hands in his jacket pockets. But before he could say a word, I turned and walked down the steps. As I passed Maggie, she caught my arm for a second, then smiled. You did good, she said. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The house still smelled like ash, but now it echoes with drumming, laughter, and wind chimes carved with my grandfather's name. They danced in the wind. Delicate, hollow notes carried from the porch all the way to the trees that lined the hill. Where once silence ruled like a shroud, the land now pulsed with footsteps, voices, and the rhythm of drums that made the soil seem to breathe again. It was late April. The fields surrounding the farmhouse had begun to green, patches of wild sage and early blossoms defying the cold. I stood near the threshold of what was once a decaying house and now held the sign. Lakota Heritage Learning Center, etched by hand, bold and proud. Children crouched on blankets beneath an elm tree, learning how to braid beads onto leather. An elder told stories nearby, his voice deep and patient, threading memory into sound. Samuel stood with two other leaders, explaining how the center would rotate seasonal workshops. Language, medicinal herbs, preservation law. The building behind me had been gutted and reborn, its bones still the same, but its spirit no longer haunted. I held the yellowing drawing in my hand. A bird, mid-flight, its wings stretching beyond the roof of a house sketched with uneven lines. Walter had given it to me when I was 7. I never understood it then. But now I could feel it in my chest. He hadn't just left me land. He had left a path. A volunteer stepped up to the mic and motioned gently. It was time. I moved to the front porch where a makeshift podium waited. My palms were slightly damp, my heart quieter than I expected. I didn't prepare a speech, just a memory. This land, I began, voice steadier than I felt, was a secret even to me. A corner of my life locked away behind silence and half-truths. But what I've learned is that secrets don't die. They wait. They wait for someone brave or broken enough to come back and listen. I paused, looking across the gathering. Faces, some curious, some tearful, others simply watching. "This is not my land," I said, softer. "It's our land. A story that belonged to many before it reached me. And now, it can speak again." Applause rose gently, not thunderous, but real. It settled around me like a blanket. Afterward, I wandered through the house. The old wood still creaked, but the floors were sanded, the windows clear. In the main room, an exhibit displayed Walter's artifacts, carefully mounted with translations and notes. I saw the medallion again. Beneath it, a placard read, "Donated by Sara Wynn, heir and steward." Maggie found me near the fireplace. "You're not terrible at speeches," she said. I smirked. "Coming from you, that's basically applause." She handed me a folder. "There's an opening. Volunteer legal consultant for Indigenous land protection. You interested?" I looked out the window at the children laughing near the stream. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I think I am." Outside, the wind shifted. The sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting everything in a gold that felt holy. Then I saw him. Ryan. He stood across the field, alone, hands buried in the pockets of his coat. His face unreadable. No entourage, no lawyer, no performance. Just him, watching. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. Instead, I turned and walked back into the laughter, the drumming, the stories that finally had a place. Later that night, as I locked the door to what was now both home and history, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. "You were never meant to find it." "But you did." I stared at the screen. The porch wind chimes trembled faintly in the dark. Mabel was gone. No one had seen her for days, but she had left the door open, and I had walked through. The wind carried the scent of sage and rain as I walked through the doorway, now carved with words I once thought would never belong to me. This house, once abandoned, once a punchline to a cruel inheritance, now felt like something sacred. I didn't just reclaim a building. I reclaimed a bloodline, a truth, a name. Ryan never apologized. Jake never looked back. And my mother? She vanished into her silence long ago. But their absence didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval to breathe, or their acknowledgement to exist. What they tried to bury, I chose to unearth. I touched the drawing my grandfather gave me years ago, the one with the bird breaking free from a crooked rooftop. As a child, I thought it was just a strange sketch. Now I saw it clearly. It was a prophecy. I was the bird, and this land was never meant to be a cage. We cut the ribbon that morning with the drums playing low in the distance. Children ran between cedar poles while elders passed down stories beside restored stone hearths. And as the breeze rolled in, I knew this wasn't just a victory over Ryan or a courtroom win. This was justice. Quiet, rooted, alive. And here is the lesson Sarah's story left behind. Justice is rarely loud. It doesn't always come with headlines or confessions. But when someone dares to face betrayal with truth and refuses to flinch when threatened by those in power, justice finds a way to rise. Like the steady return of spring after a cruel winter, the truth always returns to bloom, no matter how long it's been buried. They thought the house would break me, but it became the place where I rebuilt everything they tried to erase. I didn't burn bridges, I restored them, with evidence, with memory, with bloodline. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth. My brother still believes legacy comes in acres and numbers. He's wrong. Legacy is what you pass down in silence. and what you choose to speak when the silence no longer protects you. They said I didn't belong, but the land said otherwise. Today, the farmhouse isn't just mine. It's ours. A space for stories that were once buried, for names that were erased, for the parts of history no one put in the will, but still survived. To anyone watching this who's ever been handed less than they deserved, to anyone who inherited silence instead of explanation, let this be your reminder. You are allowed to go back. You are allowed to unearth. You are allowed to keep what they threw away. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else know that not all justice comes with noise. Sometimes it comes with a single page, a name rewritten, a house that still stands, and a woman who finally knows where she came from. Tell me in the comments, have you ever found truth where you were told there was nothing left? Have you ever turned a forgotten place into something sacred? Thank you for staying till the end. This channel isn't about revenge. It's about remembrance. It's about the stories that weren't told, and the people brave enough to tell them now. From me, and from all of us who believe in quiet justice, thank you.